I think we're going to do productive stuff today, if that is all right. First, we can finish up what we were talking about yesterday. I think I asked, are there any more uh, practical things we can, practical strategies we can add? Because we asked about, can we get a menu of protocols? So these are just all more practical protocols that we can leverage towards our attention, focus, motivation, agency. All right, this second menu focuses on advanced optimization, protocols that fine tune the timing of learning, clear metabolic waste more efficiently, and leverage hormetic, beneficial stress to upregulate receptor sensitivity. Interesting. Phase 5, neuroplasticity and learning, the encoding state, maximizing the rate at which the brain acquires new skills or information by manipulating glutamate and replay mechanisms. Primary targets: glutamate, acetylcholine, dopamine, error signals. So this is specifically learning stuff, so we could put this in the learning section. When studying or practicing a skill, adjust the difficulty so you're getting the thing right 85% of the time. If you are getting it 100% right, increase the speed or complexity immediately. Error-driven plasticity. Dopamine is released on success, but acetylcholine, norepinephrine, attention are spiked by errors. Optimal learning occurs when the task difficulty is calibrated to a 15% error rate. Below this, you are bored, no attention. Above this, you are frustrated, give up. Wow. Okay, every 5 to 10 minutes during intense learning, stop for 10 to 30 seconds and do absolutely nothing. Every 5 to 10 minutes during intense learning? We should do that on this channel. We should just have like a 10 to 30 second moment of silence, meditation moment. This allows the hippocampus to save the data. Nice. During short pauses in learning, the brain replays the neural sequence of the skill you just practiced at 20 times the speed in reverse. This replay is essential for consolidating and is driven by dopamine and glutamate. All right, novelty stacking. Before a study session, spend 5 to 10 minutes exploring a new environment. For example, a new walking route, a new room, or even listening to completely new music. Then immediately begin the learning task. Exposure to novel environments triggers the VTA to release dopamine, which lowers the threshold for plasticity in subsequent tasks. Interesting. Interesting. Okay. The cleanse state, structural maintenance, physically clear. So I do want to ask, just are there any more? And we just keep doing that until it keeps giving us more stuff. Physically clearing the brain of metabolic waste, amyloid beta, adenosine, to prevent cognitive decline and brain fog. Glymphatic system, cerebrospinal fluid, BDNF. All right. Train yourself to sleep. This is lateral sleeping position. Train yourself to sleep on your side using pillows for support. This is a mechanical hack for adenosine clearance. The brain's sewage system works via hydraulic pressure. Research in rodents suggests that sleeping on the side opens glymphatic transport channels more effectively than sleeping on the back or stomach, clearing waste up to 25% faster. This we need human data for this. This is kind of wild to tell people. Yo, Darmadon, what's good? We're doing mighty fine. Got a little bit done. Actually, I just had a Gemini convo where I was talking about these the first section, let's just say, of part 2. So we might go through that after we see how long we can go, just asking for more protocols, just to see. Chilling, just working on music. Hell yeah. First draft of 8 to 9 tracks, or 8 out of 9 tracks done. Coming up with names now. Awesome. Are you how are you going about that process? Are you just like gonna listen and see whatever name comes to mind, or is there a different type of strategy you like? All right, Zone 2 cardio, 150 to 180 minutes per week of Zone 2 cardio. This is the base that allows the brain to recover from high focus bouts. Sustained low intensity cardio where you can hold a conversation but it's difficult. Releases brain derived neurotrophic factor and anandamine. Unlike high intensity interval training, which is a stressor, Zone 2 improves cerebral blood flow and background mood without spiking cortisol excessively. All right, then fasted training. Perform your cardio or skill training in the morning before ingesting calories to leverage the ghrelin-BDNF synergy. And then we've got exercise in a fasted state, increases ghrelin, which crosses the blood-brain barrier and sensitizes dopamine receptors in the hippocampus, potentially amplifying the cognitive benefits of the workout. Potentially? We got to know. All right, then we got hormetic stress and resilience. The toughness state. I got, transmuting the breath. Who is the rouser? 9-folded. Nice, very nice. Like thinking of stuff I've read and prompting Gemini. Nice. I've got a name that I want to use for a song someday, but I just don't know what the context is going to be, but I just think it's so cool. But Abiogenesis, I think, is a sick name, and it's like the that moment when life came from inorganic matter somewhere deep in an ocean. All right, then we got hormetic stress and resilience, the toughness state, increasing the brain's capacity to handle stress and pleasure by upregulating receptor sensitivity. We got dynorphins, mu opioid receptors, and then heat shock proteins. All right, sauna / heat stress. 15 to 20 minutes in a sauna, followed by a cooling period. Repeat 2 to 3 times per week. Consult a doctor first. Heat exposure causes the release of dynorphin, a molecule that makes you feel mild dysphoria. In response, the brain upregulates increased sensitivity of mu opioid receptors. This means that after the sauna, your brain is more sensitive to natural endorphins, creating a sustained mood lift. Hell yeah. Cyclic hyperventilation. 25 to 30 deep rapid inhales, exhales, followed by a lung empty hold for 15 to 30 seconds. Do 1 to 3 rounds before you need to be alert. Never near water or driving. Right. Intentionally hyperventilating, for example, like the Wim Hof style, spikes adrenaline and reduces brain oxygenation momentarily. This teaches the brain to maintain calm amidst agitation, effectively raising your stress threshold. Interesting. Life was planted here by the Greys. Hell yeah. That's basic New Age history. They came in the night. Bruh, the hyperventilating thing is nuts. It's so freaky. I would never. I've seen people do Wim Hof stuff. Yeah, I mean, you got to be like, you got to be sitting down. You got to be secure. I would not want to do that anywhere except for the comfort of my couch or something like that. But people seem to say it works. And Wim Hof is one of those examples where they've scientists have actually looked at him and they can see that he's incredibly different under the hood. And yeah, it's just a crazy type of meditative state that he's built for himself. All right, advanced chemical support, the stacking state. Using precise supplementation to provide the raw materials for neurotransmitter synthesis during high demand periods. Primary targets, GABA, acetylcholine, dopamine. Note, always consult a medical professional before starting new supplements. All right, we talked about this stuff, right? L-theanine, L-tyrosine, magnesium L-threonate. Okay. Let's see what we got for any more. Pretty sure his abilities are talked about in Buddhist history. Oh, that's cool. I know Tibetans generate heat with Tomo. They cover themselves in a cold towel and start steaming. Oh. Interesting. I guess it's just something to get the body going, get the body stressed slightly. All right, I gotta put something in the dryer, so I will be back in like 120 seconds or so. So BRB. All right. Instagram. Am I gonna be able to see this? Team study Tibetan monks practicing Tummo inner heat meditation. Oh, we gotta get this bigger. I guess we're not gonna be able to get this bigger. Oh, 49 degrees. And the sheets measured approximately 3 by 6. They are in there. Would almost immediately go into uncontrolled shivering. Their body's desperately trying to generate heat. Yet shivering would not be enough and body temperatures would continue to drop. Under certain circumstances, death could result. So, yet the monks through their Tummo practice were not only able to maintain body temperature, they somehow increased it. So, and soon it was apparent that they were capable of doing That's beautiful. From a scientific point of view, Tummo is a truly remarkable mind-body interaction. Spiritual base generates heat that is only now just beginning to be understood. Pretty cool. Yeah, I imagine you can't just jump right in. You have to maybe work up. You have to build. Is this the same? Oh, is this the same what? Oh, is this the same? I see. It's on YouTube. Maybe not, but we'll see. Yep, this looks like the same. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah, I'd imagine you'd have to like work up while meditating to train your body to be able to handle that and to react to it. Okay, this comprehensive menu translates the neurochemical mechanisms from the report into actionable protocols. These are categorized by the cognitive state you wish to achieve. The go state. So now this is just saying things again, right? Cold water immersion, the Galpin equation for hydration. Drink your body weight divide by 30 in ounces of water every 15 to 25 minutes during mental or physical exertion. Reducing oxygen. Okay, even slight dehydration drops blood volume, reducing oxygen delivery to the brain, increasing stress hormones. Yeah, 25 deep inhales through the nose. This is the hyperventilation. We got visual anchoring, stare at this. Yep, all these are things we already saw. The flow state. All right, so this is all restating stuff pretty much, except for maybe we got some extra ones. We got the random, we got the fasting, we got the binaural beats. That's all the same. We got the 85 rule we just did. Micro rests, yep. Zone 2 cardio, NSDR, psychological sigh, sense of, yeah, all these are the same. Gratitude, these are new. Recall a specific time you were thanked or helpful, or watch a narrative of someone receiving help. Focus on the feeling of the interaction. Then we got the shared eye contact stuff. And then social touch / grooming. Appropriate social touch, such as handshakes, hugs, or professional massage, activates these pathways to reduce stress. So afference, light stroking touch activates specific C tactile fibers that trigger oxytocin and endogenous opioid release. All right, why are we calling this the Huberman? Did I say Huberman? When was Huberman elicited here? Did I say Huberman? Oh, it brought up Huberman style. I see. That's how it got in there. Huh. I wonder why Huberman's that, like... Maybe it's just because he's popular that a language model would reference him. Gratitude is sometimes incorporated into loving kindness meditation. Nikon is one that isolates it. Huh. It's a structured Japanese self-reflection practice that fosters gratitude and self-awareness by focusing on one's relationship through 3 core questions. What did this person give me? What did I give this person? And what troubles did I cause this person? Huh. Nice. All right, so I think we've exhausted this chat. So then we could get to this. So I post the introduction of the document. I post the table of contents of part 1. And I say, I've posted the introduction for the document that I'm working on. I've finished a draft of part 1. This is its table of contents. Unfortunately, the indentation is not kept, so you have to infer the structure. And then I am now working on the outline for part 2, and I want to get some feedback. So I'll let you digest this now, and then I'll show you my notes for part 2. Okay, this is clearly a substantial and philosophically rigorous project. You are building a comprehensive system that attempts to bridge the gap between determinism / physicalism and phenomenology / meaning. Here is my digest of where you currently stand to ensure we are aligned before you share your notes for part 2. The narrative arc, based on the table of contents, part 1 appears to function as the foundational ontology for your framework. It moves from the objective to the subjective and finally to the agentic. The meta problem, you start by acknowledging the tension between the physical brain, evolution, determinism, and our subjective experience, consciousness, the hard problem. You seem to rely heavily on predictive processing, homeostasis, and embodied cognition. This suggests your argument is that meaning is not magic. It is a biological function of how organisms make sense of the world to survive. Formation of self, you explore how genetics, predisposition, and social context, culture / norms, create the schema or understanding through which we view the world. This thing wouldn't know that when I say predisposition, I'm referring to our predisposition in every moment, like we are predisposed due to both our nature and nurture. This establishes that we are not blank slates, but we are malleable, neuroplasticity. Redefining freedom. You appear to be arguing for a compatibilist view of freedom. Freedom is not doing whatever you want independent of causality, but rather the specific ability to use reflection and realignment to edit our own narratives and schemas. All right, the bridge, the section, a practical path forward to part 2 signals the shift from theory to praxis. So it got all that just from the table of contents. It didn't read anything else. Part 1 explains how the machine works. Then part 2 needs to explain how to drive it. According to your introduction, part 2 is tasked with identification, how to figure out what our values / goals actually are. Since part 1 likely argues these are often implicit or socially conditioned. Pursuit strategies for building the gap between current reality and aspiration. And then action, operationalizing the freedom through reflection concept introduced at the end of part 1. Ready for part 2. I am ready to review your notes. When you paste them, I will look specifically for blah, blah, blah. And I tell them not to do that, I think. This is what I have for part 2 right now. I don't need the full review, but feel free to give any initial thoughts or questions. So then I paste in the whole outline we've got for part 2. All right, this is a dense collection of notes. You're essentially writing the user manual for the human machine, building the gap between the philosophical architecture of part 1 and the granular biohacking and productivity strategies of modern self-improvement. The transition from part 1 to part 2 is palpable. You are moving from how we are shaped to how we shape ourselves, and I would say how we can shape ourselves. The one thing that I didn't get from just our table of contents is the fact that what we're trying to do is give ways that we can think about ourselves and these strategies such that we can leverage them. These aren't just like, I'm not trying to create truisms here. Here are my initial thoughts, structural observations, and a few strategic questions to help you refine this before you start drafting the prose. The narrative arc, hardware, software, operations. The structure is sound. You are effectively organizing the document into 3 distinct layers of agency. We've got the hardware, the practical levers of agency, optimizing the biological machines, so sleep, diet, neurochemistry, attention, etc. Deliberate reflection, biological conditions. So this is where, when we talk about all the stuff we did in the past week, this is biological conditions. It's like the hormones and neuromodulators that are affecting our focus and attention. And then this was where we could have a discussion of building energy and motivation. Then emotion regulation, cognitive function, automatic behaviors, biases, etc., beliefs. And then we can talk about our personal contexts. And this is the topic that we started actually in December. All right, the navigation, identifying what to pursue, determining the direction, values, goals, vision. So this is where we can cover everything that goes into making sense of, I guess, where we are and what we would logically want to do. So this is, this is not filled out yet, but we've got topics such as like thinking itself, being precise in speech, or just being precise, making things explicit, logical reasoning, rational thinking, honesty, openness. Then determining where to go. We have to actually, identifying what to pursue. We have to actually determine where to go. Reflecting on values, interests, then considering possibility, making decisions, psychological theories of goals. These subsections need to be like ironed out, but this is just a skeleton that we could follow. And then we got the operations, pursuing goals effectively and managing trajectory. This is the day-to-day execution. So pursuing goals effectively is like, okay, we're trying to make something happen. So this is, the type of framing that we can use that would effectively allow us to get there. We could talk about how we can learn stuff and acquire skills, because a lot of our goals require this type of step. Habits and routine, building habits and routine, leveraging the social environment, etc. Yeah, the skill could be anything. So we're going to have to learn, we're going to have to coordinate with other people perhaps. And then managing trajectory, this is the full picture where it's like, okay, doing the stuff and then over time, going back to what you're doing and seeing what your progress and figuring out whether or not you want to keep doing something or whether you want something to change. Am I big on Jung? I want to get back into him. I have not read a single lick of Jung. I just know him from Jordan Peterson, which it seems like Jordan was very influenced by Jung. So chances are I am very influenced by Jung without knowing it, ironically so. And I don't know if I'll need to jump into Jung real heavy. He is one of those types of people that were really influential, like right before the internet and whatnot. So I'm sure a lot of people are leveraging Jungian ideas and incorporating it into more contemporary science. So I don't know if I need to jump into Jung directly or just leverage the people that are most influenced by him, but are also adding in the stuff that's relevant today. I'm sure his stuff is relevant today still. I read one of his books is like 8 years ago, ordered one the other day. Oh, nice. I mean, he strikes me as a legend in the field, like a goat, if you will. All right, feedback. This structure works well because it establishes capacity before direction. Right, that was the goal here. We're starting at the lowest level and going upwards. You cannot effectively pursue a goal, no matter how noble, if your body budget is bankrupt or your attention is fragmented. The redundancy risk and how to fix it. Because this is a comprehensive system, concepts like habits, learning, and dopamine appear in multiple sections. You need to be very careful to distinguish the context in which they appear to avoid reader fatigue. And this is something I said, or I respond with agreement there. Like, we need to make sure that if we're talking about habit, you know, let's just say in the context of automatic behaviors, we don't want to actually go into, you know, how to build habits and break habits yet. We'll do that in, actually, you know what? Breaking habits we might want to do here. Maybe not building habits. Building habits we might want to do here as like a pursuing goals. But breaking habits is more of like what we can do because of our automatic behaviors rather than building automatic behaviors. So we'll have to just be clear about the context and what we're doing. We're not going to try to restate things. He invented archetypes, collective unconscious, synchronicity. Yeah, I mean, all those, obviously, I keep here. Actually, I don't know how synchronicity is used, but I've certainly heard of all of these. He does seem to be capturing everyone's attention, even if they don't know it. All right, the biology versus psychology tension. You have a massive amount of notes on biological optimization. This is valuable, but it risks turning the document into a health optimization blog rather than a philosophical framework for agency. Yeah, I just said that this outline is kind of lopsided because we started working on this first major section, so there's a lot more here. Once we start working on identifying what to pursue, like, we can fill that up. There's going to be a lot to go there. Okay. Strongest new concepts. Several of your notes introduce powerful framing concepts that elevate this above standard self-help, such as the horizon of possibility. This is the stuff that we literally put in yesterday. I think the idea that stress, trauma, biology literally shrinks the cognitive scope of what you perceive as possible. This is a brilliant bridge between part 1 and part 2. Thank you for Chris Williamson, I think. Agency disinhibits dopamine. This is a crucial loop. Acting makes you feel like an agent, which releases dopamine, which fuels more action. It explains momentum scientifically. And then identity lag, the concept that you achieve a goal, but your self model hasn't updated. I mean, I think we're going to have a lot more cool stuff than these things, even though these are really cool. But the questions for you to refine your outline. In part 1, you established that we will have a privileged that we have a privileged aspect of predisposition that allows us to realign. I think it misunderstood this, actually, right? How did it get this? Privileged aspect of predisposition. Oh, it's just making a... Okay, now I see. I didn't even realize this. It's just making a complete speculation based off of the table of contents. Yeah, the whole point of this is that, like, we're always in this position where like, in the moment we have our most updated understanding. So it's like a, you know, it's a privileged point of view, inherently so. That's not to say that, you know, you have any benefit from being there. You're only there. You're only in the moment. Okay, how do you practically teach the reader to distinguish between... Okay, and yeah, it's asking about the conscience here. I don't know if we're going to leverage conscience as like a thing. I think that was more just as like an intuitive example to get the reader to understand what I was trying to say in part 1. All right, the scope of identifying what to pursue. This is similar to the other thing I said. Your notes on pursuing goals are very dense, but the notes on identifying them are slightly lighter. Yeah, we haven't filled it out yet. The epilogue dilemma. You mentioned an epilogue regarding collective wisdom. I think it fits better in part 3, but yeah, I mentioned that we could talk about stuff in this epilogue that specifically relates to pursuing goals. All right, so then I say, I agree that I need to be careful about redundancy, and I will make sure to keep recurring topics within the context of its section. That said, I will try to have prescriptions throughout the entire part 2, even if just beneficial ways of thinking about things, like recognizing habits as habits. In order to not bog down the document, I will try to make this information as accessible as possible, while still packing a practical punch, in other words, maintaining its essence. It might seem like I have more notes for the practical levers of agency major section. That is because I started working on building out those notes first. I'm working in linear order, so I will eventually be doing the same for the later sections. The idea of our conscience, that voice that tells you what is what and when something isn't as you thought it was, is not something we will need to mention directly. That was more of an intuitive parallel for part 1 so that people better understand what I was getting at. That said, we will certainly discuss the idea of listening to our consciousness, mind, conscience, etc., for information throughout the entire part 2, as it's necessary for better understanding yourself, your values, your direction, your progress, etc. I plan to talk more in depth about mindfulness during the leveraging attention subsection as an introduction that we can then utilize throughout the document. Once again, don't worry about the scope of these sections too much yet. I will most likely expand the scope of each section and perhaps add more sections/subsections if need be. At this point, I'm only confident about the major sections. We will certainly make the identifying what to pursue as dense as it demands to be. In general, my intention is not to miss a single necessary/evidenced topic within this broader trajectory. Good point about the epilogue touching on part 3. However, I will most likely keep it as it prepares the reader for much of what we will talk about in part 3. That said, I might cater the epilogue only to practical strategies within the topics of part 2, so not going into what the Bible says about morality, for example. Something like Stoicism can talk about an identity towards goals, so that would certainly fit. Okay. It responds. The approach makes sense. Working linearly allows you to build the foundations, the levers, so that when you get to identifying and pursuing, you can reference back to those mechanisms without re-explaining them. Regarding your plan for prescriptions throughout, that is the right call. A manual shouldn't just describe the machine, it should tell you how to maintain it. For the early sections, biology/automaticity, the prescriptions can be about maintenance and monitoring, whereas the later sections can be about deployment and execution. That's kind of off, but that's not important now. Since you are locking in section 1, the practical levers of agency, let's refine the structure of that specific section to ensure the practical punch lands without getting bogged down in biology. Here's a proposed structure, and I say not so fast. Okay, I don't want to jump that far ahead. Let's just focus on the deliberate reflection section. So I just wanted to focus here. We can assume that we've already and the reason I want to do that, because this is an LLM, is it might talk about all these sections in a significantly different way than I might want to go about this. Also, I don't know how I want to go about a lot of these sections, so I don't think we want it to talk about any of these later ones without first making sure we understand what's going on with the earlier ones. That's why I wanted to just say, all right, let's go section by section here. Let's just focus on the deliberate reflection section. We could assume that we've already introduced within the prologue reflection and deliberate reflection as central concepts in part 1. So we're bringing these back. We've already talked about this idea of reflection and this idea that we can deliberately reflect on things. Here we are specifically diving into this topic further, exploring how we can practically think about our deliberate capacity to reflect upon life, reality, self, etc. Our conscious grasp of attention subsection will look back at a topic discussed in part 1, how, as far as we are concerned, our conscious attention is a manifestation of underlying processes, importantly both bottom-up and top-down. Here we can basically introduce everything involved in these underlying processes without actually going deep into them, as we will in future sections/subsections. We want to point out connections to all the intuitive aspects of our experience. For example, the extent of our focus, energy, multitasking, etc. We will need to remind the reader how what comes to our conscious attention is affected by prediction, which many neuroscientists call controlled hallucinations, and our interpretations often lag behind action, as many signals go straight to the body before reaching the frontal cortex. Perhaps the most important point of this subsection is making it clear that we have an intuitive conceptual understanding of our attention, focus, consciousness, etc., which we can recognize in the moment and even leverage. So it's really important that we have those concepts in mind, that we understand what our attention is, and that we know what it means, or like we have an understanding of what it means to direct our attention. Like those I know that goes without saying, but it almost doesn't. We have to make it clear that we are leveraging those here, that we are afforded the possibility to do that because we have these concepts in mind. We can imagine that even though we've shared the same DNA with humans for a long time, right? We've become more free via our culture, our increased language. Let's just say our more complex language allows us to, in some sense, understand our whatever, whether it's bottom-up signals, our actions, etc., better. That's not to say that we're like fighting our way out of determinism, which we're not, but it's saying that, at least in this controlled hallucination that we have all these capacities that we can deal with. First of all, we have the concept of capacity, that we have we have an understanding about the things that we can do. We have possibility in our repertoire. Now, these aren't things that early humans had, and thus their intentionality was diminished in this way. That they didn't have the capacity to recognize, even the most fundamental observations of mindfulness. Like they wouldn't be able to recognize them as a thing. Like they wouldn't be able to interpret them in the same way that we can. All right. Then in the leveraging attention subsection, we need to discuss what this process is like phenomenologically. We somewhat discuss this in part 1, something like the prompting our mind to do something. We need to reiterate how important it is that we have a conceptual understanding of possibilities regarding our attention and our ability to direct it, and how our framings literally affect what becomes conscious to us. Here we can reintroduce the idea of mindfulness, how it can be deployed, etc., etc. And then in building skills of attention, we can discuss the possible skills we can train, as mentioned in the notes, leveraging neuroplasticity. Okay. All right. Our conscious attention. Should I write down any of the stuff that I say here? This is hopefully I get rid of these like really soon, maybe even today. I just want to make sure that we don't lose this, and I don't have to find like this exact message. And then in build, okay, we can discuss the possible skills we can train. That's easy. So let's go. Our conscious, actually no, deliberate reflection. Let's just see what's being said here. All right, perhaps the specific idea is that while not all attention is conscious, our conscious attention, grasping our experience via top-down attention with linguistic narration. So I want to get rid of this type of idea. Is our primary pragmatic lever of agency. However, we may need to discuss automatic behaviors for gaining a practical hold over our attention. Nah. Even though it's inappropriate to think about our consciousness as some separate entity than our top-down or bottom-up signals, we need to do so here for pointing out where we actually have control within our own reflective experience. In order for us to have a practical discussion about this, we need to conceptually differentiate ourselves from our brain's processes. Once again, we are only referencing our understanding of ourselves in the moment. Okay, all that stuff can go in the next section here. This needs to cover the biological foundations of attention. All right, we got that. We got it. All right, while we cannot manually control every firing neuron or hormonal shift, we possess a distinct intuitive interface for managing our experience, our conscious attention. This is the primary wedge of freedom introduced in part 1. Before we can effectively set goals or build habits, we must learn to operate this interface with precision. All right, so I don't want to get add that first part here, but let's just kind of add this. Oh, that's another page. Maybe that. We could get rid of that, and now we got 2 main notes. This is good for our introduction. That's fine. And perhaps I won't write this introduction until we actually deal with... First of all, we have to deal with this introduction. I totally forgot about that. And this is going to be redundant to when I say it here. Yeah. This is actually going to be the same. I could put it here. We must not learn to operate it. It's going to be, we must clarify the interface of agency and learn how to operate it effectively. Something like that. Like we just want to know what things can we do. That's really it. Like, what things can we do that affects our agency? All right, our conscious grasp of attention. So, what do we have here? Building on part 1, we acknowledge that what we experience as focus is not a standalone power, but the emergent result of competing processes. It is the theater where bottom-up signals collide with top-down directives. All right. This is good stuff. Top-down versus bottom-up. Distinguish between reactive attention captured. Yeah. So this is going to be under that type of point. The emergent result of competing processes where bottom-up signals collide with top-down directives, and we can talk about, you know, generally the top-down and bottom-up signals. I don't know if this is even necessarily the prefrontal cortex. We could just say frontal cortex. All right, the lag of perception. We must accept that our conscious grasp often lags behind reality. Many signals trigger body actions before they reach the frontal cortex. We flinch before we know why. Further, and this is like a, you know, an intuitive example that I think people usually think about, but even when we're doing things that seem like we really choose to do them, we can see that we actually do the action before we have the thought that we're choosing to do it, or when we know we're choosing that. Our brain is a prediction machine, often projecting what it expects to see rather than the raw data. Right, this is really important when we're we're trying to define the scope of our conscious grasp of attention. Okay. We need to clarify the scope of our conscious attention. How consciousness and top-down attention relate. We got that now. This has to mention how attention is heavily influenced by competing drives and underlying homeostatic processes. Absolutely. Preparing for what we will talk about. Yep. When we don't have a grasp of attention, we are effectively on autopilot. That's actually, this is like a serious issue that we should talk about. Attention is the cognitive process that selects what information gets processed deeply. It's like a spotlight focusing the brain's resources. Ooh. This would be, I mean, this is part of this first type of discussion. And we're only, we're really only concerned about conscious attention here. Human attention and working memory capacity are limited. Classic research by, yeah, this type of thing. Where do we put that? I guess that this would be also a discussion here. This is like ramifications. Intuitive. Yeah, like we're trying to build intuitions here. We're trying to make it clear that we're not just, making stuff up. Important for part 2. All right. Did I skip over something? Yeah, even though it's inappropriate to think about our consciousness as some separate entity than our top-down. Okay, so this is something that we're going to have to maybe talk about in leveraging attention. Something like prompting our mind, yeah. The intuitive handle. So what was that? The manifestation of process, the intuitive handle. Lack of perception. All right, the intuitive handle. Despite this biological complexity, we possess an intuitive, user-friendly conceptualization of attention. We know what it feels like to pay attention or lose focus. Okay. And this is kind of that same idea. So we should introduce it here. I think we could get rid of this. Yeah, unfortunately for part 2, even though there's obviously like really fundamental observations about the nature of self, such that when we have an idea about ourself, it's not some like true, it's not some true thing about ourself, transcendentally. It's just, once again, it's a momentary hallucination, you could say. It's a momentary thought that's going to, it's a momentary manifestation of our current understanding, which is going to constantly change. And not just that, it's what we're predisposed to think about in this moment, the way that we see ourselves. So the issue though is like when talking about a practical guide in part 2 here, we have to entertain this idea that we are a self that can do things, even though we don't want to do that in like a really low philosophical sense. We have to do that here. Now, that being said, we do have discussions about identity that come up within part 2, and we will once again, try to tell readers that identity is something that can change over time, and that it's something that you can play with or negotiate with or explore or leverage. It's something that is not static. All right, then we have these constraints. Why do we have the constraints here? We can feel when our energy is low. Okay, maybe we could just put it here. I like this. I like this. The critical connection, this intuitive gap, is the entry point. We do not need to be neuroscientists to operate the machine. We simply need to recognize that conscious attention is a limited resource that is constantly being bid on by biological drives. And that's a huge deal. Like bringing up the fact that there are competing drives. Emotional states and automated habits. So this is just setting us up for everything that will come. All right. When we don't have a grasp of attention, we are effectively on autopilot. This is something we could talk about in leveraging attention, I think. But we'll see. I'm still like I'm actually figuring out the identity of these sections in a sense. All right, so this is all about this working memory thing. So for complex problem solving, we offload some info to paper or digital tools, recognizing limitations and working around it is smarter than trying to brute force. Also, neural processing speed is finite. Multitasking makes each task slower because the brain has to switch contexts. All right, this is a useful point to make here in constraints. Accepting that you can't do two mentally demanding things is the exact same at the exact same time without performing dropping is a biological reality. Hence, focusing sequentially is generally better. We can get rid of that. The constrained working memory is biologically limited. Is this just the same thing said 5 times? Okay, it is. Yep, we can get rid of this. So for complex problem solving, though, we want to put this later on when we talk about cognitive function. I don't know. I'm just gonna throw it here. Yo, NOK Life, what's good? Welcome back. We're getting down and dirty in the weeds here. Starting to work on the outline for part 2 of this document. What's new with you? Focus and attention is biologically limited, working memory limits. It requires the resources mentioned above to function. Okay, we haven't talked about those resources significantly yet, but we can, yeah, we will bring up that later. The cost of multitasking. All right, we've already talked about that. Okay, rather than conceiving of attention as a spotlight directed by a central executive, a more scientifically sound approach may be to conceive of attention as the emergent result of biased competition among multiple partially active representations. This is, what was this from? The Embodied Cognition Handbook, chapter on attention. Okay, this all goes into the... Yeah, okay, this is all good stuff for the point that we made. Where was that actually? Here? An emergent result of competing processes where bottom-up signals collide with top-down directives. So we can just throw this all here. This is all good notes for that. Okay, leveraging attention. Let's see. Did all my notes here get handled here? We'll look back at a topic discussed in part 1, how, as far as we are concerned, our conscious attention is a manifestation of underlying processes, importantly both bottom-up and top-down. Here we can basically introduce everything involved in these underlying processes without actually going deep into them, as we will in future sections or subsections. We want to point out connections to all the intuitive aspects of our experience, for example, the extent of our focus, energy, multitasking, etc. We will need to remind the reader how what comes to our conscious attention is affected by prediction, which many neuroscientists call controlled hallucinations, and our interpretations often lag behind action. So we've got all this. Did we get the controlled hallucination thing? I don't think I'm going to say controlled hallucination, but I just need to make the clear point. The lag of perception, right? We've got that. Oh, this is, yeah, and we just kind of put it there, so. Perhaps the most important point of the subsection is making it clear that we have an intuitive conceptual understanding of our attention, focus, consciousness, etc., that we can recognize in the moment and even leverage, which is what we talk about in the next subsection. Okay. And okay, cheers. That's awesome. Having your own emoji or emote. All right, leveraging attention. The phenomenology of direction. How we actually feel. How do we actually use this handle? It functions like a prompting mechanism. When we decide to look for our keys, we are essentially broadcasting a top-down signal. So I actually pushed back on this. I don't like this framing here. So that biases our visual cortex to prioritize. So this is going to be tentative. Hopefully we will fix this shortly today. We can apply this same mechanism to our internal world by prompting the mind with specific questions. We direct resources towards resolving that inquiry. Kind of, yeah. I don't know. The power of conceptual framing, our ability to direct our attention, is heavily constrained by our conceptual understanding. You cannot deliberately attend to something you do not have a concept for, that you cannot fathom, almost. A person without a concept of cognitive bias might simply feel right. A person with the concept can prompt their mind to look for confirmation bias. So, okay, this is a great example because we are going to do that shortly. Framing as a filter. This explains why part 1 is necessary. Our stories and concepts act as the lens for our attention. If we frame a sensation as anxiety, we scan for threats. If we frame it as excitement, we scan for opportunities. So a lot of this stuff is unconscious. That's a point to make. A lot of this is unconscious. 3 exclamation points because it's that important. Interpretation is not just something that we consciously do. Many parts of the brain are interpreting in some sense. Predictions are colliding with bottom-up signals, and an interpretation is made. The interpreter model creates the narrative that our attention then reinforces. Right, that's the point here. The interpreter model creates the narrative. Our narrative often comes after the fact of what we are doing, what the thing is. Like, we get the information of some sort of interpretation after the fact. All right, mindfulness as a tool. Oh, and the other cool thing is, like, we can't imagine that the stuff that comes to our consciousness is any one interpretation in whatever chain is leading to our conscious attention. We're interpreting the interpretation, which is probably an interpretation of something else. Like, the brain is mapping maps of signals, of bottom up and top down signals. So that's the difficulty here. All right, mindfulness as a tool. This is like a huge deal. Here, mindfulness is demystified. Okay, mindfulness. Mindfulness is the deliberate application of attention to the contents of consciousness. We talk about that in part 1. So once again, mindfulness. It is the practice of stepping back to see the mechanics of the mind, watching thoughts arise rather than of the conscious mind. It's not the mechanics of the mind, but you're watching the mechanics of the conscious mind. Watching thoughts of our conscious mind. Watching thoughts arise rather than simply being the thinker. This creates the space wedge where choice becomes possible. Where choice becomes possible, where possibilities of choice become manifest, where possibilities perhaps of choice, perhaps of choices manifest. That's the real way to say that. Building skills of attention. All right, let's not jump that far ahead. I don't know. I should just go on to my notes here, and then we can go backwards. First, a couple of notes. We need to be careful when talking about the prompting mechanism of our thoughts. While top-down signals do act as priors throughout the brain, biasing it, our experience of prompting the brain is a mix of bottom-up and top-down signaling. I want to make it clear, not necessarily explicitly, that the notion that our thoughts are simply top-down signals combating bottom-up emotions is antiquated and not quite correct. This is really tricky to explain, so I will need some help, since it's so unintuitive. Our observed thoughts, even the ones we feel ownership of, are afforded by both top-down and bottom-up signals, and these affect subsequent top-down and bottom-up signals in such a way that it feels as though we are directing our focus. I think we will discuss the interpreter module within our conscious grasp of attention, so we will be prepared to talk about leveraging attention with this in mind. From our point of view, it's almost not important to need to know this. However, and perhaps this is actually the main point we want to harp on once again, it's important that we deeply understand that the thoughts we have, even when we feel as though we are prompting ourselves, are affected by our predisposition/understanding, what we discuss in part 1. It's important to reiterate that because it suggests that we can specifically direct our thoughts within our current horizon of possibilities towards changing the contents of our thoughts in the future, and thus our ability to leverage our attention towards certain ends. Everything else you said for leveraging attention is perfect. Then can you let me know what you think about the direction for the deliberate reflection section? Anything else that would be useful to mention during this introductory section? Question mark? Okay, this is a sophisticated distinction, and you're absolutely right to insist on it. The general versus soldier metaphor, top-down versus bottom-up, is too crude. It implies a ghost in the machine that sits apart from biology and issues commands. The reality is, as you noted, is that the command itself is a biological event. The thought, I should focus on my work, arises because of a convergence of bottom-up signals, anxiety about a deadline, the physical sensation of being rested enough to work, and top-down priors, your self-identity as a hard worker. Here is how we can refine the deliberate reflection section to capture this nuance without losing the practical utility, followed by my feedback on the overall direction. All right, so we're going to start here. Refining our conscious grasp of attention. So we start up here. We need to explain that conscious attention is not a force separate from the brain. It is the leading edge of the brain's processing. So this is the idea that we're kind of getting here. The interpreter and the illusion of control. Where do we put the interpreter? The lag? I think that's it, right? think the predictive processing is more important than this lag of perception. Okay, interpreter module. The illusion of control. We introduce the module. This module, likely in the left hemisphere, weaves disparate neurological signals, gut feelings, visual inputs, memories into a coherent narrative. Okay, so where is this? This is actually going to be here. We can talk about that here. I'm going to just say we can introduce this here to a coherent narrative. When we feel we are directing our attention, we are often narrating a shift that has already begun due to complex internal alignments. Ooh, I don't know if that's the best way we say this. When we are directing our attention, right? We are often narrating a shift that has already begun due to complex internal. No, that's the right way to say it. The takeaway, we don't need to control the neurons. We need to curate the narrative. If the interpreter... Okay, this is actually huge. And goes to this whole, like, intuitive understanding. Takeaway, we don't need to control the neurons. We need to curate the narrative. If the interpreter says, I am distracted because I am weak, that feedback loop reinforces the distraction. If it says I am distracted because my biological engine is low on fuel, that narrative invites a different intervention. Crazy. All right, the prompt as a resonance, not a command. So the correction, instead of framing the prompt as a top-down order, so we actually talk about, when do we talk about the prompt here? I think we might wait until the next section. Right? Here we talk about a prompt, phenomenology of direction, like a prompting mechanism. I'm going to just say important. Instead of framing the prompt as a top-down order, frame it as setting a filter. When we prompt ourselves, if, for example, what is the most important thing right now, we aren't fighting the bottom-up signals. We are changing the valuation criteria for which bottom-up signals get through. And this is actually accurate. Like that's what happens. Now, you know, it does affect top-down signals, and it does actually affect what happens to the body in such a way that the next bottom-up signals would be changed. But yeah, we could say, you know, I could say and much more as time goes on. I'll just do it without the comma. All right, the horizon constraint. This is where you hammer home the part one connection. You can only set filters for concepts you possess. If your understanding, predisposition lacks the concept of, okay, this is where, yeah. You are blind to it. Person without the, yep. They physically cannot prompt their brain to look for it. They are blind to it. All right, therefore, expanding your understanding literally expands your capacity to direct your attention. Yeah, kind of. Like it's not the capacity to direct your attention. You know what? No, I take that back. This is literally what I just said earlier. Without the very understanding that we can direct our attention, we humans had less you could say less of a capacity to direct their attention deliberately, in the sense that they understood like that they were directing their attention. You know, we can, brings us to like the, you know, a philosophical question of what does it mean to be free? And I think even for the people, even for like a libertarian free will person, you probably could argue that if someone doesn't have the understanding of doing something, then they wouldn't have the freedom to do it, even for in their framework. So that's like the, you know, that's a huge deal. But I still don't want to say this because this is like unintuitive, and it, you know, I could argue for it, but it's not the best way to say it. So it would be something like expanding your understanding literally expands like possible things that you could direct your attention to. Or we specifically harp on the fact that you need the understanding of being able to direct your attention in order to direct your attention this way. A phenomenology. Okay, the power of conceptual framing. Heavily constrained by our conceptual understanding. Okay, is heavily afforded by, afforded and constrained. We can only direct our attention in this deliberate way, deliberate/cognizant way, because we have the an understanding that we can do so. Okay. Therefore, expanding your understanding. Okay. Oh wait, I forgot. We actually we were down here. Person without that, blah 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 blah. A lot of this is unconscious. All right. What are we at? An hour 12? We got time. We got time. Expands your capacity to direct your attention. This is the killer insight. Studying philosophy isn't just thinking, it's upgrading the operating system of your attention. All right, we got to stop with that. That's a little self whatever. Okay. Feedback on the direction. So let's chill on that right now. No, let's just read it and then we can finish the rest out. The direction is strong. It effectively moves from the abstract to the concrete. However, given your emphasis on the limitations of conscious will, it's an emergent property, not a godlike power. I think you are missing one critical practical element in this introductory section: the concept of the wedge, or the pause. Since our thoughts are often automated responses to bottom-up stimuli, the most fundamental skill of deliberate reflection is inhibition, not action. I wouldn't say it that way, but this idea of the wedge here of recentering is actually really crucial, and I think we should talk about it here. And it should be within this mindfulness. Deliberate of attention to is the deliberate application of attention to the contents of consciousness, but then there's also this idea of the wedge. Now, this is something where maybe we do... should this happen first? What comes first? Mindfulness of the contents of consciousness, or the transition from operating in the world unconsciously to conscious reflection? of stepping back to see the mechanics. So we have to talk about that. We have to talk about the wedge. Yeah, we could just put it here. Since our thoughts are often automated responses to bottom-up stimuli, the most fundamental skill of deliberate reflection. We don't want to say this is inhibition, not action. Dot, dot, dot. Before we can direct our attention. We must interrupt the automated flow. Interrupt our unconscious engagement with the world. Our automatic, our habitual, engagement with the world. Why at it? This bridge is the gap between understanding we are biased and doing something about it. The wedge is the split second of mindfulness where you realize, oh, I'm having a thought. That moment of metacognition is the leverage point. Nice. All right, language is the primary lever, once again. As a primary heuristic lever. Deserves a teaser here. Top-down signals are often linguistic. Bottom-up signals are often sensory. That's, I don't know if we should say this. It should just be like conscious signals often manifest linguistically. That's really it. I don't want to make a case that that one thing is I mean, bottom-up signals, you could say, are not linguistic because, you know, they're not, they haven't touched the frontal cortex yet. That said, I don't want us thinking about it in that way. I think by the time, like, these things happen so fast in the brain that by the time you're noticing a bottom-up signal, unless you're deep in meditation, you've already interpreted it. Unless you're trained in meditation. We use precise language to tag bottom-up signals, effectively moving them from the background to the foreground where they can be managed. This validates why talking to yourself is a functional tool for attention, not just a coping mechanism. All right, epistemic humility as a practical tool. If our conscious grasp is an emergent narrative, then certainty is a danger signal. We should frame doubt/uncertainty not as failures of attention, but as successes of reflection. When you feel uncertain, it means the autopilot has disengaged and the pilot is actually looking at the map. So we're not going to do this, but we do need to talk about our sense of certainty again at some point within making sense of the moment. And then once again, when talking about managing trajectory. But for now, I think we could chill. We can chill. We got enough epistemic humility within part 1 to leverage. Revised outline segment for deliberate reflection. Here is how those nuances would look in the structure. Okay, so it's actually putting this stuff in. The emergent pilot, the narrative lag, the constraint of understanding. We got the prompting mechanism, the wedge, and phenomenology of intervention. The phenomenology of intervention. Okay. All right, and then we just had the building skills, right? Should I do that yet, or should I just start working through this? When we don't have a grasp of our attention, we are effectively on autopilot. We're consciously lost. So that's something to say here. The intervention, directing attention. What we know about our experience of unconsciously directing our attention. What we have called reflection. Ooh. We don't have to put that there. What we know about our experience of consciously directing attention, what we have called deliberate attention. All right, so we can grab this, we can throw it in where we haven't here. We introduced it up here, right? Yes. Nice. Okay. Then in leveraging it, we need to discuss what this process is like. We somewhat discussed that in part. Okay. We need to reiterate how important it is that we have a conceptual understanding and blah, blah, blah. Literally affect what becomes conscious to us. Here we can reintroduce the idea of mindfulness, how it can be deployed. Yes, we've already done it. We've got it. All right, now we've got this, how this affects focus over time. Oh. That's important. We don't have that yet. Leveraging focus, actually, yeah. Ooh. What are we doing here? So this is kind of... This is like actually a post mindfulness. We can do focus and mindfulness in a sense. Reflective focus. All right, and then we can leverage focus. Holding focus over time. How we can leverage focus to frame the situation which affects top-down priors and ultimately the rest of the system. That we've put in the conceptual framing, right? Oh no, this is actually something different. We could do here. This is all under deliberate reflection, right? Yeah, this is leveraging attention. So we could just call this focus. How we can leverage focus to frame the situation. Okay, how this affects our focus over time. How we can leverage focus to affect our brain's long term. Internalizing. Okay, this is the skills of attention that we building skills. Okay. Mindfulness, Sam Harris. Mindfulness is simply the ability... Okay, so all this stuff, mindfulness necessitates a conceptualization of what you can notice in the moment. This is actually a fundamental point. It's like similar to what we have been getting at. I wonder if we need to have like a whole subsection on mindfulness. Maybe not. Because mindfulness practices we can put in building skills of attention. This is just mindfulness in the moment. This is actually mindfulness meditation, right? This is a very specific. This is a specific mindfulness meditation practice, I should say. Practice / skill. Like this isn't necessarily like what mindfulness is in general, like when you're focusing on things. This is a certain way of going about mindfulness that is effective as a skill over time. Necessitates a conceptualization of what you can notice in the moment. So mindfulness training, but we could just say mindfulness necessitates. And then I can throw this down in here on mindfulness. Okay, and I think Monday we do another run at mindfulness. Multitasking myth. The brain cannot truly Okay, we got that already. How to stop zoning out. Maybe this should go to the discussion of automatic behavior. Zoning out is your body's way to increase cognitive resources. It restores part of your cognitive function. When we zone out, we seem to deal with unresolved issues. Takeaway: if you accomplish the task outside of zoning out, then it will significantly reduce the impulse to zone out. It's how we can break out of the automatic cycle of zoning out. Okay, so this is like a... I'm throwing this in like cognitive functioning. This is like a higher abstraction discussion about focus. Yeah. Okay. Building skills. What do we got? Framing effects. How we interpret a situation determines our biological response to it. Right? Conceptual framing. Growth mindset. Yeah, we can get rid of that. We're going to use that specifically later when we're talking about pursuing our goals. This is great. Then we could put that there. We could say a lot of this is subconscious or unconscious. Yeah. All right, we can point out that the reason that we can see thoughts arise during mindful meditation is because we tell ourselves to look for thoughts arising. The outcome or goal of mindful meditation is habitual self-consciousness. Is a habitual self-consciousness in which the identity of merely paying attention to thought as they arise has taken hold. All right, we can just get rid of that. That's fine. I think the point's going to be made. We don't have to be too... Like, there's no reason to actually be that stickler about mindfulness. All right, I think I'm going to call it here because I've thoroughly worked myself. But I'm going to continue hopefully tomorrow morning here. And yeah. And then we continue grinding. We got to get this stuff done. We've got a lot to talk about here. A lot to cover. But I'm glad I'm glad some of these subsections are taking shape. They're not just a bunch of random notes now. All right. Well, thanks to anyone who's still chilling, and thanks everyone that came in. Dharma Dom and OK Life. And have a good rest of the day. See you later.